Dharampal ji, to us, has been a teacher. He has been a senior friend. We have spent a lot of time with him. We have learned many things from him. In particular, we have learned from him how to look at different aspects of India and of Indian people, out of Indian history, Indian civilization. He is many things to many people. Different people are celebrating his centenary year in different ways, discussing different aspects of him. To me, the most important aspect of Dharampal ji is his scholarship. The rigor of his scholarship is what, personally, there will be many other things that will matter to me, but to my understanding, what matters most publicly of Dharampal ji is the fact that he wrote especially these 5 books based on his archival researches in England. These books are special. The 5 that we have reproduced, the book on civil disobedience, the tradition of India, the book on science and technology traditions of India, the book on the indigenous education, and the last one, which is not, of course, archival, is where he tried to understand that all these attributes of Indian society, where do they come from? What is the mind from which they arise? And the small book he wrote as his first book, compiling the debates in the Constituent Assembly on the question of Panchayati Raj in India. So, to the extent possible, we have been trying to look at his work from a scholarly point of view. And today, what I'll try to present is what he has presented in this book, and also try to outline as to how we can carry forward the work that he started in this direction. I think one of the most important things we should be doing while celebrating the centenary year of Dharampal ji is to start working in the directions that he has opened up for us. And in many senses, any one man's work remains incomplete. It will be true tribute to him that if we can start Dharampal ji School of Learning, which in different aspects of Indian polity and society, the direction he has shown, we continue further explorations. In that sense, Ankur has written a PhD thesis starting from his beautiful tree. Prabal Rai Chaudhary has written another thesis. Unfortunately, I don't see him here today. So let me now come to the book. This book, The Beautiful Tree, Indigenous Indian Education in the 18th Century, which was published in 1983, is a compilation of the British records about, like at least 4 of his other books, there's a compilation of the British records on the indigenous education as they saw it, as they recorded it in survey. The major part of the book is a compilation of the survey which was undertaken in Madras Presidency on the directions of the then Governor Thomas Munro, It ran from 1822 to 26. And this was a very systematic survey. Every collector was sent a detailed format in which to report the situation of education in his collectorate. In addition, most of the collectors, they sent that form and also wrote a fairly detailed note. Some of them wrote very brief notes, but many wrote fairly detailed notes of what they understood of the prevalence of indigenous education in their collectorate. This survey covered the whole of Madras Presidency, which was a very large part of India. These 21 districts, they have included the whole of the coast from Tirunelveli to Ganjam, which will mean all of the coastal Tamil Nadu, all of the coastal Andhra Pradesh, and a fairly large part of the coastal Odisha. In addition, of course, all of the Tamil Nadu mainland was included, and it very large part of the interior Andhra and Rayalaseema up to Bellary. From, if you start from the coast, go up to Bellary, including Anandpur, that area will get covered. And in addition, it had Malabar on the west coast, and Canara north of Malabar, which means half of Kerala, of the current Kerala, and much of the coastal, at least a fairly large part of the coastal Karnataka was included in this. They also had included Srirangapatnam was also part of this. So this data is from this vast part of India, the data of the Munro Survey. In addition, in this book, Dharmpalji has given extract from William Adams, this is 1822 to 26. Then he has given extracts from William Adams' report from Bengal and Bihar, and that is was 1835 to 1838. That report, it is the survey that William Adams did was only 5 districts of Murshidabad, Birbhum, Bardwan, South Bihar, Tirhut, and Nator Thana, the survey that he himself did. But he recorded whatever was available in the records about indigenous education, and not only school education, indigenous higher learning in his reports. And that covered almost all of what is Bangladesh, in fact, all of what is Bangladesh today and what is West Bengal today. And it went beyond, it covered this South Bihar and Muzaffarpur. So that part of, and then it covered Cuttack. So that again was a very large chunk of Indian landmass about which this book has information. This information is, of course, not as complete as in the Munro Survey, but it tells you a great deal about what was the kind of education system, schooling and higher learning prevalent in this part of India. The third extract that Dharmpalji has taken, again, it is an extract from Leitner's book on the education, indigenous education in Punjab. And Leitner is covering all of Punjab. This is 1882. From 1862 to 1882, he's giving the details. This is after the annexation of Punjab. So this is because Punjab got annexed much later. This is a later book than the other two. From this, Dharmpalji has taken not too much of texts are given, a few pages are given, but in the process, this beautiful tree covers the scene of indigenous education in the pre-British times for a large part of India. Today, when I was, or yesterday, when I was looking at the coverage that Dharmpalji has achieved, it came to my mind that we should have made, while reprinting this book in the Dharmpal Classic series, we should have made a map of this area that has been covered. But compared to what has been covered, what has been left out is also important. We have no data on Bombay Presidency in this book. We have no data on any of the princely states in this book. No data on what is Uttar Pradesh and what is the central provinces, that almost all of central India. No, it is not that the data is not available for these areas. So one obvious thing which should be done on the basis of the beautiful tree is to compile whatever archival historical data is available for other parts of India which have not been covered in this book. If we were a regular scholarly country, our historians were like the historians anywhere else in the world. This would have been gotten done in routine, because this is obvious scholarly work which needs to be completed. Somebody has started, it has to be completed. But I will request, since Geeta ji is not has come to India, and one of the purposes is, I think, to carry forward the work of Dharmpal ji, she should perhaps lead this effort to collect whatever, much of it may be easily available. Some parts must have been published by others, but it will be very interesting to collect all the data of the geographical parts of India which are not encompassed in the beautiful tree. That's the first point I wanted to make, that Dharmpal ji in the beautiful tree has given us data from a very large part of India. But there are parts and significant parts which are left out, and there is no reason to believe, in fact, there's all reason to be certain that the indigenous education would have been equally prevalent in all those parts of India also. And if we were to work on them, maybe we'll learn about new pedagogies, new ways of doing things that these other parts of India, as we learn from the beautiful tree, we would perhaps learn something from those parts of India also. So this, I think, is something I want to flag, is a work undone, left undone, which needs to be completed. And we should start the process of getting this completed. The next, now I come to the content of this book. From the content, one thing you learn is about the extent of education, that what was the percentage of students of school-going age who were in school at the time of these surveys. And that data is both quantitative and qualitative. As far as quantitative is concerned, the most systematic in that, of course, is the Munro Survey. And the number we get from our today's standards is not something which seems really large from our perspective today. So this, when Munro, the Governor Munro looks at the data from this 21 collectorates, he makes a summary of it, and he comes to the conclusion that about a quarter of the boys of school-going age were actually going to school. About a quarter of boys of school-going age were actually going to school. And then he says, but this number is perhaps not very reliable, because there'll be many more students, many more boys who will be taught at homes. And he says we must add at least half more to it, and the number of school-going boys going to school will be more like 1/3 than 1/4. Now, as I said, that this number is not something very big on the face of it, but it was big for that time. That especially when compared to the prevalence of school education in the Europe of that time, this for the British was something which would have opened their eyes, which they were found extraordinary. Similarly, Adams' report also talks much more. It talks about one school in every village, or 1 lakh schools in the area that is talking about. And he says one school, there was probably one school for 30 or 35 boys. So if you go by numbers, the data is very impressive, which shows you there was a systematic way of educating where a fairly significant part of the school-going boys could go and did take education. But this was not complete literacy in any sense of term. This was much high compared to what was happening in Europe, much higher than what was happening to Europe. But what is, to me, what seems more interesting is the qualitative part of where the collectors and others are talking about their impressions of what is the extent of education in India. And there, the impression one gets is that the actual prevalence of education, elementary education, and also higher education, that's a different, which I will not be talking much about. This also mentions the higher education in detail. That actual prevalence of elementary education was much more than what the numbers suggest. I already said that Munro is saying that we must add at least half more to what the numbers are saying. And that he bases upon the report of the Madras collector, who is saying that he has counted this 26,000 students, but the actual numbers will be 5 times that. He's saying 5 times that, which will mean that in Madras, the Madras collector believed that in Madras, the almost more than 100% of the school-going age students were in school, which meant that everybody was going through the school. That's the impression Madras collector has. On the basis of that, Munro says, okay, let's add what we have got in the numbers, let's add half more and make 25% to 33%. And similar views come from this collector of Bellary, who is saying that what I am reporting is a very low state of affairs. This society has been broken down. And what I'm sending to you today as the details of this education in Bellary area, that is not the reality of what was education in this country or in this part of India. William Adams seems to suggest, maybe I should quote him, his impression seems to be, it's much talked about that there was his statement, there was a school in every village. But his impression seems to be that the whole of the society was actually educated. Let me see if I can get to that. What is in? Let it be admitted that these calculations from uncertain premises are only distant approximations to the truth. That's what he's saying about his numbers. And it will still appear that the system of village schools is extensively prevalent. that the desire to give education to their male children must be deeply seated in the minds of parents, even of the humblest classes. And that these are the institutions closely interwoven as they are with the habits of the people and the customs of the country, through which primarily, although not exclusively, we may hope to improve the morals, because they have this other problem also. Not only they want to know what is the education here, they want to know how to change this education. But in the writings of William Madden, the prevalent mood is that this is a literate society. They are trying to teach everybody, make him. And in the Leitner actually says in so many words that this society has a very deep concern for education. He's saying respect for learning has always been the redeeming feature of the East. And East in this case means India. To this, the Punjab has formed no exception. Torn by invasion and civil war, it ever preserved and added to the educational endowments. He's talking about Punjab, which has always been a frontier province, which had always, as he's saying, wars and invasions. The most unscrupulous chief, the avaricious moneylender, and even the freebooter, vied with the small landowner in making peace with his conscience by founding schools and rewarding the learned. So that is the kind of society they're talking about. Notwithstanding the numbers they're giving, those numbers are not showing you 100%, partly because the time at which they're surveying the area already is a time when it is about a few decades after they have taken over, and much of the arrangements of the society have broken down, and so have many of the schools. But the clear impression is that this is a society deeply interested in learning, and everybody is there are systems to ensure that everybody acquires literacy. In fact, it should be kept in mind, India has never been a society, illiterate society. What literacy meant for us, that also will come. Maybe I'll have time to talk about this. But it is a literate society, and the first debt of that we owe to Dharampalji is to give us numbers for showing that this is a literate society, and also giving us all these quotations, giving us the opportunity to quote all these from these important observers to prove that India was a literate society before the British came. So that one question was of numbers. And what Gitaji was saying, the question that Hartog was posing to Mahatma Gandhi, who had said that India was more literate than what they before the British came than what the Indians are today. That part he is able to establish in numbers. So we do owe a debt to him for proving Mahatma Gandhi right and giving us a vision of what kind of literate society it was. And here we are talking only about elementary literacy. The other issue that Dharampalji looks into in these tables, or these tables look into, is that of equity in education, whether it covered all communities, all sections of the society, or one that limited to a few. And this table, since Munro, the format gets sent to the collectors, it divides students and teachers into how many of them are Brahmins, how many are Vaishyas, how many are Kshatriyas, and then how many are Shudras and below, and then how many are Muslims, how many are boys and girls. So this question is answerable from the data. And it seems clear that the idea that the schools were dominated by the Brahmins is complete humbug as far as this data goes. That just isn't true even remotely, except for some areas, some districts where the Brahmins seem to be particularly dominant. There, the Brahmins may be forming little high percentage, but in most places, their percentage in the student population will be fairly low compared to maybe comparable to their population. And the Shudras, the Vaishyas, the Kshatriyas, and the Brahmins, and the Muslims were all represented in the school. So that those numbers are, because here the absolute numbers do not matter, it's the ratios that matter. Those numbers are very reliable, and that it can be said with complete confidence that the people getting educated were not limited to boys getting educated, were not limited to any particular sections of society. I'll not give numbers today because on this online, the numbers make even less sense. But one can say with complete confidence that there was equity. And if we are talking about, if Madras is talking about 100% literacy, it has to be equitable. 100% is never inequitable. And if Adam Smith is saying that everybody is concerned, the way Leitner is saying that even people who are generally considered low in the society, they are interested in making endowments for education. Obviously, education is not the attribute of any one group. This is the other part that Dharampalji establishes in this book. Dharampalji also, especially in Adam, he looks at the data for this. What we told you about was the teachers, students, but even amongst teachers, all castes are represented. In fact, there's a list of in that his survey of those 5 districts. There's a list of teachers with the castes given, and that list looks like what the later the British made lists of castes from for carrying out their census. That list seems to encompass, it seems to be as comprehensive as the census caste list that the British made later. And since I've been working on castes for the last 3-4 years, many of the castes that I come across today in the OBC lists are represented in those lists that Adam is making from the caste from whom the teachers came. In that, so that is also very well established. Only one caveat I'll enter here, that in those lists of Bengal that Adams made amongst teachers, there are several who are Chandals. And when I looked at this list, I thought these Chandals perhaps meant the Pancham caste, the outcasts. But later I learned that Chandal is not, in Bengal, is not used for the way it is used in the north. Is one of the OBC castes that Chandalas are. There's some other name they use. Sahas will be, for example, Chandals in that sense. But these lists are very interesting. They should be, and Adam makes them with some. He seems to be enjoying doing it. So those should be looked into. In fact, The Beautiful Tree, everybody should anyway read. The third aspect of this book that I want to talk about is what it tells us about the organization of education. The impression that comes from what these collectors are reporting and what Adam is describing, Leitner, since there's not much reproduced here, is that that this was something like a voluntary activity for which the student teachers, the parents paid fees to the teachers, and some important person gave his house, some students paid fees, and that's how the teacher was maintained. This is the fact of the matter at the time we are talking about. But this was not the way Indian education or any activity of the society was organized in India, which we know from other work of the Rampal. And also in many of the collectors' reports, which repeatedly are saying that there were large inams for running education, there were large deductions for allocations for running education system, much of which has been withdrawn, is not available anymore. And the system became some kind of a voluntary education system. But what we know is that we know about this Changalpet, where we have done extensive, looked at the 1770 survey that the British had done extensively. And that society is not doing anything voluntarily. Everything is organized. The locality organizes all functions as a state organizes its functions. So there's a budget allocation for each of the activities that the state seems to perform today. So from the villages that we are talking about, each village will have an allocation for the militia who are responsible for the security of the boundaries as well as the security of the locality. There will be an allocation for the Kanak Pillai's establishment, which is the establishment of the registrar, who will keep all the records and also take care of these allocation arrangements. There will be an allocation for the great temples, and for every temple of the village, there will be allocation for the maintenance of the roads and for even lighting lamps on the roads. There will be an allocation, fairly large allocation for maintaining the irrigation works. And similarly, there will be allocation for what was called in these records as the Malabar teacher, or the Telugu Vajar. One of the Tamil teachers were called the Malabar teachers, and the Gentoo, the Telugu people were called the Gentoo teachers. So there was a allocation from the produce of the locality for maintaining all services, including education. And that's how they functioned. It was not a voluntary way of doing things. It was a budgetary allocation, except the budget is being made at the level of the locality. And that locality also makes a budgetary allocation for the larger polity, for the larger temples, the greater scholars, the greater militia leaders, for the greater administrators. So that polity is very much like what Gandhiji envisaged on the eve of independence, when he talked about the oceanic circle polity, where locality and the individual at the center are at the center. They run their own affairs through their own resources, allocations made from their own resources, and allocate resources for the next circle of polity, which then allocates for the next circle of polity. And thus you get a system, what Gandhi is calling a polity of horizontal oceanic circles, which is whole in itself, where no part is privileged over the other, and every part is equally proud of being part of a large oceanic circle. This completely opposite to the kind of pyramidical vertical polity that we are used to imagining. So this education was part of that polity. And in that polity, locality was making arrangements, making allocations for the palikadam, for the school and for the school teachers. In our records that we have seen, there are at least 350 localities we have seen a allocation, a significant allocation for the teacher and for the school. So this question, I think, is another thing which we need to do further research on, because Dharampalji's book on this has been, his data that he has given has been misunderstood or intentionally misinterpreted. In fact, a book was written by the same name by some O'Toole, some British, I think British, Tooley, that he named the book the Beautiful Tree, and he seemed to claim that Dharampalji is suggesting some kind of private education run by the fees of the obtained from the teacher, from the parents, and he seemed to suggest that the smaller entrepreneurs, district, village level and the town level entrepreneurs are doing this very well. They are running this state level schools in English, and they are doing better than the government schools in the state. That's the kind of thing and there's a big group in India who wants to support that kind of education and want to draw sustenance or draw evidence that this is the ancient Indian system from Dharampalji's work. But I think we need to work more. All the collectors are saying that this system of voluntarily, the teachers paying, the parents paying fees and voluntarily organizing some education is an attribute of the decay of the Indian polity. It is not the original way of doing things. Original ways where appropriate allocations are made in the budgetary process for the education at the school level. So that, I think, is another area which we need to do further research on. Here, I would like to point out that in certain areas, say in Leitner's work, that's not quoted much here, but I remember having read his book several decades ago. But there, in Punjab, according to him, this was not really a voluntary activity. Much of it was run by the religious institutions, by the gurdwaras, by the masjids, that system that he's talking about. And I have some familiarity that these institutions were ensuring basic literacy amongst even women. At least the gurdwaras were doing it till at least the time of my mother. Because what Leitner is referring to these institutions in a big way, that is perhaps special to Punjab, because as Ankur has noticed, the religious institutions or religiously inspired institutions became the carriers of modern education in Punjab also. You have the Khalsa schools, you have the Sanatan Dharma schools, you have there will be the Islamia schools in the part of Punjab which has gone away, and you had the Arya Samaji schools somewhat later, out of which the DAV movement came, which Ankur has worked upon. But my understanding is that this movement, DAV movement, as well as this multiplicity of schools and colleges based in religious institutions, or at least religious inspiration, and named after those religions, which is very prevalent in all of what was Punjab and perhaps in parts of Western UP, is actually to an extent continuity of what Leitner was noticing. And I think that's another. Elsewhere in the rest of India, the castes perform this function. It will be the Nadars having their schools, or it will be the Gaundars having their schools or colleges. What was performed in Punjab by religiously motivated institutions. And that makes that area special, because the caste doesn't have that much salience in that. But there were also caste-based schools, because almost everywhere till the schools were taken over by the government, there were Vaishya schools, but there was a reason for that, which I will come to. The next question is the content of education. What was taught in these schools? Now, on that, there's complete clarity amongst all the collectors and in Adam Smith, that what they are teaching is what will be practical literacy and numeracy. That they are, in fact, they are very unhappy. Most of these people are Christian, and they keep on saying that they are teaching no morals, and which largely meant religious. When you said that there's no moral education, it meant you're not doing any Christian education or religious education. That these schools are not doing any teaching of morality, of higher ideas, higher ideologies. They are doing only what is practical literacy, practical numeracy. But they are doing that very well. William Adam is not at all happy with these schools, especially because they have no Christian or moral education, is saying. But he says that I will be, once a child after 4 or 5 years comes out of the school, I will be doubtful that anywhere in Scotland he will become so efficient in numeracy and literacy as these children are. But then these schools are trying to teach only this, only numeracy and literacy. And as this Adam, particularly William Adam and many of the collectors are pointing out, the literacy and numeracy for each student is tailored in a way that it is the numeracy which is relevant to his trade. That the Vaishya's son will have learned the kind of bookkeeping that a Vaishya needs, and a peasant son will learn the kind of arithmetic that a peasant needs, and a carpenter's son will learn the kind of arithmetic. So these are saying that when they go out, it's a matter of just spending a couple of years in the trade of their parents, for them to become completely proficient in living the life that they are used to. So what this education is trying is not anything very big. That is being tried at when you have the schools of Vyakarana, schools of Sankhya, schools of Vedas, schools of Ayurveda. At higher learning, that all is being given. But at the school education, the intent is that you impart basic numeracy, basic literacy, that so that the person, in fact, they're talking about that he should be able to read the letters of his peers and write to his peers, and he should be able to do the calculations of his profession that he belongs to, or the and section he belongs to, efficiently. And all of them saying that in this they are coming out very efficient, very economically, costing almost nothing, and still making all of them in a practical sense literate and numerate. And when I read this, and I've read it several times, I I feel really disturbed because with all that we have done about education in India, and we have done a great deal, we certainly have a more than 100% enrollment ratios all across the country for all communities. We have failed to ensure that somebody coming out of the school after even 8th standard, and perhaps most often even 10th standard, doesn't have the proficiency in basic literacy and numeracy. And this, I am not saying, all education experts keep repeating this. Even the National Education Policy at many places states this, that this basic problem of imparting functional numeracy, functional literacy to our children, we are somehow not being able to solve. And here is a society, we are the inheritors of a society, which from school education, this is all that it expected, that you acquire functional literacy, you acquire functional numeracy, and this was done, as all this people were saying, in very little cost. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi is saying in this book somewhere, when he spoke that if you want to give literacy and numeracy to Indian children, make them literate through the British method, I can assure you that it will take 100 years. And I don't know whether he uses that word. He almost says that and the process will go bankrupt. But he knew, and this book tells us, and there's so much data available, that there's a way of imparting functional numeracy, functional literacy. This, of course, will mean that we lower our sights of what we want to achieve from school education. And I have been saying repeatedly that let us do this, that let us do the first 5 years of education the way the traditional society used to do. Make everybody literate and numerate, functionally literate and functionally numerate. And after that, you can start doing this high kind of education where you want to teach set theory to children of 10 years. That you do once they are beyond 10 years. Once they have become literate, nobody can stop people from what they want to do. They can teach group theory and set theory and matrices to students at the age of 12. And they can teach 20 languages if they want to, because there's another claim of the NEP that we want to have multilinguist. We want to run schools in a multilinguist atmosphere. But let us do first 5 years in a single language and single effort. And that is not a very big effort. And if you follow Mahatma Gandhi, follow what the beautiful tree is saying, that it's just a question of ensuring that let's not bother too much about these children up to the age of 10 and up to the age of 10 or 11, let us teach them only literacy and numeracy. I think that is something we have to talk about in this centenary year of Dharampalji. That's one thing this book is telling us in very loud terms. Finally, the pedagogy of education. And I'll take only 5 minutes on it. Now, since their object is making children familiar with the numbers and letters. So the pedagogy as is described by Bellary, collected in great detail, and by William Adam in great detail. Pedagogy involves a repeated exercise in writing the letters and pronouncing them. From the day one, you write and speak. Yeah? And that's what, first you do it on sand, then you do it on your wooden plank or whatever. And much later, you start doing it on palm leaves. But all the time, major part of schooling is forming the letters and speaking them out. And once you know that well, then you start forming words and things like that. Similarly, in numeracy, the much of it is exercising the learning the numbers, form of numbers, speaking out the numbers, counting, and the tables, the multiplication tables. So much of education they are describing repeatedly. Much of school education is exercising these things. And this is how I remember school education used to be for us, at least for up to the 4th or 5th standard. And this is a very important pedagogy because what happens through this process is that the form of the letter and the sound of the letter get etched on your mind. And in fact, what we are doing today is that we are separating, in fact, all across, even in the US, you are separating the phoneme from the what will be called the orthoneme or whatever, that the form letter and the sound of it, they have been completely separated. And this is terrible pedagogy because this is giving, for the West, it is not possible to follow our pedagogy because they do not have phonetic scripts. Ours are completely phonetic scripts. And for us to associate the sound of the letter and the form of the letter with each other, we not only associate sound and form of the letter, we also associate emotions with the letter. In fact, in every education, every language of India, there will be these, I don't know what they're called in other parts, that for each letter there will be verses. And that verse has meaning. And that meaning has to be associated with that letter. And that is there in what is called, there's a name for this, but it is there in every language. That every letter that is etched on mind, you also have certain emotions associated with it. You become literate in a very, very deep sense of the term when you go through this. So I think this pedagogy also, those who are familiar with pedagogy, this has to be seriously looked into because actually the modern children across the world are having this problem when they have dissociated the form of the number from the number and form of the letter from the sound. Form of the number is separated from the value of the number and form of the letter is separated from the sound of the letter. This is being done very systematically. In fact, it is considered high modern pedagogy that you don't make children associate the two, that they will do sometime later according to them. So I think what Dharmapalji has compiled has lessons for the kind of pedagogy that we need to follow at the school level. I think I'll close here. I'll repeat the directions in which we need to do research to carry the beautiful tree forward. One is that the archival material on those geographies, from those geographies of India, which have not been covered here, much of it is available, and it will be very interesting. What comes from the princely states will be even more interesting. All that should be compiled, and a major effort should be made to do that compilation. Dharmapalji did for a fairly large geography for us. The geography which has been left out should not remain left out. And we do need to do research on the objective of education at the elementary level. Is it what this traditional system is saying, is to impart functional numeracy, functional literacy as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, with as little cost as possible, or is it something else? Or if it is something else, can that be postponed and this is achieved first? So that is the another level which we need to research. Third, on the organization of education suggested in the beautiful tree, the impression that comes to people that it is some kind of voluntary private system of education, I think we need to seriously look at it and provide, collect information to show that it was not a. In fact, Dharmpalji was used to be very angry when people used to say that this Jajmani system, that you voluntarily do something to give some money, and in return he gives the services. He was saying there's nothing voluntary in India. All of it is the locality and the community have the attributes of the state, and they have the sovereignty. They do their budgeting, and what is being done is not a voluntary activism. It is not NGOism that this thing. And we should look at the pedagogy that these people are suggesting. The British looked at it very carefully. They gained from it some parts of the Indian pedagogy. They tried to, especially the Montessori system, the monetary system, they tried to replicate in their schools, but we can learn much more from it, and we do need to learn much more from it. Thank you. I'll close here.
So the other question I had in mind was regarding the point that you made about this whole discourse about moral education that came in much later on, and it was not present in our education system earlier. Sir, could you please elaborate on that? Because what I found out also from my research was that in the indigenous education system, there was no separation of secular or religious education or moral education, or because everything was very integrated as such, and the syllabus, I mean, it was very integrated. There was no separate disciplines as such. So, sir, could you please elaborate on that aspect?
So, Ankur, again, what I understand from all this is all that I can tell you is that unlike what we have started thinking today, the school is not the only locus of education. The school that we are talking about here is the school of literacy and numeracy. The values have to be taught, morality has to be taught, manners have to be taught. But the school is not the place for that as far as this is concerned. The place for that is the family, the village, the community, where all this is picked up. That's what in Hind Swaraj, Mahatma Gandhi is saying, that what do you want to do with this child who knows how to respect his parents, how to address his parents, how to sit when the father is sitting next to you. All this has to be taught. But the school, unfortunately, in the West, we are doing this, that all this has become part of the school education, which it is not supposed to be. School gives you a certain kind of practical, functional education, but it cannot be, if there is to be moral education has to be learned, it has to be learned in different settings at different places. And most communities, we do not know this, most communities know this. Because I remember in one meeting, there was this, what is the metropolitan of Muscat, some metropolitan was there, and I asked him something about the Christian morality or something. And his answer was, if you want to learn about Christian morality, you have to come to the church. You cannot sit here in the seminar room and ask about it. Here only, this is a different place. Here we can tell you only the theology and philosophy. So there are different locales for different things, and it's not good to mix them. They are mixing it up because the education there started in England, at least as Sunday school of the church. And part of the moral education was essential to make the industrial animal, that if you read the period of writings of the period, they're very concerned about these young children. If you look at those blue books who are being sent to the mines or to the factories, and they are half dressed because if they're in the mines. Fact is half undressed, and how to retain discipline there. They started the Sunday school movement, so they had a different problem of morality.
Yeah.
The morality here will be a different issue,
Yeah.
and I strongly believe we should try not to achieve too much at the elementary education level. Our problem is that we are of modern education in India is we are trying to achieve too much. We are also trying to teach them secularism, national integration, and I don't know, hundreds of things. While what you need to teach them to begin with is literacy and numeracy. And if you could focus ourselves on that, perhaps more could be achieved.
Yeah. And I think it also has to do with the fact that in the West, morality was taught from the Bible, and because it could not be separated from the Bible, they had to teach. So they wanted to do the same thing in India. And I think that was probably part of the problem, that this whole moral thing came up. So thank you, sir, for elaborating that aspect. And I'll move to the next question now. So this is also a question which I have been thinking about for a long time, that generally there are two kinds of models of education based on the economic model in the country that it is following. So one is a socialist kind of a model of education where the state controls everything, like like it does in other institutions. And the other model of based again on the economic model is the capitalist model, where it's completely private education and private run schools and colleges. But what I found out from the beautiful tree was that the kind of system we had was neither socialist nor capitalist, because it was neither there was no state control, because there was no centralized board or something that would tell that which syllabus would be taught and not taught in as a centralized. And at the same time, there was no capitalist. I mean, it was not a private run something, key private companies are running schools or something like that. So, sir, could you please elaborate on this aspect, that how was the Indian system different? Like it was like a third way,
I did try to explain that. Certainly, uh, I think Dhanpalji will not say that this is non-state system of doing things. This is the state in India. The locality is the as the primary unit of the state, and the locality runs it and allocates monies for it. No, it cannot be called the third way because it is outside that way of thinking. It's not a third way. This is a different way of organizing society, but which will still not mean that there is no centralized control or no control. Centralized is a different issue. Certainly on the organization, there will not be much of a control. But what is being taught, if it is being taught wrongly, if the letters are being malformed, if the additions are being wrongly taught, I think there will be ways of that. If there's a Malabar teacher here, there's also in Kundatur, there will be also a high scholar sitting in Kanchipuram, and the information will reach him that this teacher here is actually teaching in this manner, and the things will get corrected. So these are all networked systems. These are not if there is this the inner core of the wave, there are outer waves which perform both the functions. They obtain sustenance for it, ensure that the inner part doesn't get disturbed. Those who know wave theory, for the wave to continue, it is important that the outer and the inner remain in some balance and harmony. So not having centralized control doesn't mean there was no control.
So it means nobody owns this. The society owns this. Like the society is
right, and it's not private enterprise.
Right.
And it's not NGO.
So you talked about the fact that the basic elementary schools have to impart functional literacy, and I mean that was the purpose of the indigenous schools. Sir, does this mean that our indigenous, I mean, the people who designed this indigenous system had a more mature understanding of the human society? Because if you look at society in general, most of the people are concerned with doing their daily work. and very few limited people are aspiring for higher, like advanced mathematics or advanced astronomy. So that is the same kind of a system that we see in the indigenous schools, because most of the schools were for the mass population, general population, and very few were limited for the higher learning. So is it connected? I mean, can we say that, like that is a
You're
more
right, you're right. But there are obviously this, you have read the book, you know that there are institutions which are teaching higher things, and the students who go there may not even be passing through this elementary education. They may be directly going to that Gurukul, which will take them from the elementary numeracy to the higher level. They may not be actually necessarily passing through this stream.
these surveys which were conducted during this period that Dharampal ji was, he was looking at these surveys. These were all done in the colonial time, and they, of course, they had their own imperial biases, because they were done by the colonial and imperial officials. So, sir, how do we read these sources, and how do we, look at them,
No.
considering these that there are biases?
So Ankur, obviously they are doing it for their own purposes, but and we have to be conscious that they are doing it. We are reading them. So when they make a certain comment about their teachers are no good because they have no morality, you have to read it in the context in which it is being said. But that still does not mean that the data that they are providing is not meaningful. All data has to be used, and their interest in the data is very limited. At least if you remember, that the note of minute of Munro on all this data is very brief. Normally he writes very long notes, long minutes on the issues that interest him. On this is writing a very brief minute, because he is only seeing that what should I now, how do we absorb this way of education into the kind of education we want to put in place. So he writes that we will have this book library society, and we'll have some Department of Public Instruction. So that he is only seeing that how much is there which has to be absorbed into what he has in his mind to be done, how it has to be brought into. So, but in the process, we got the data. For him, it is only those three tables at the end that are presented to him. And he is not, from in that minute, he doesn't seem terribly interested in looking at all this. He's only saying, okay, this is there. Let us see how we can put it together in the system that we are going to build, and what kind of system we are going to build. But that doesn't mean that the data is meaningless.
So, sir, it is some people often argue that regarding the sociological data, like regarding the social classification, that since these surveys, like the Adam report, for example, they only covered some districts of Bengal, and it is argued that maybe that only in these districts the social classification was such that most of the people were from the highest caste who were studying there. And so what is the how do we counter the claim that this can be extrapolated for other districts and throughout the country in general, this social classification?
But Ankur, I told you that this data is not from any, the very large geography it's covering, many languages it is covering.
Right.
That the Madras Presidency data alone covers Odia, Telugu, Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam areas, right? And those who are raising this question, they will certainly know that social systems in Malayalam country could be very, very different, and the caste equations in Malayalam country could be very different than in Kannada or in Madurai or in Ganjam.
The next question is from Jayesh. He's asking, thank you for sharing. Was there any mention of why of the education in Dharampal ji research of the period? What motivated the humblest of people to send their children to elementary education? Was it just a peer pressure or some deep understanding of the purpose of education?
I am from North India, and I know that even people, when I was younger, even people who otherwise will have no connection with education, even in those families, if they have no need of education, even women will be made literate enough so that they can at least read Japji Sahib. So this is a society where it is important, the written word is important. And so there is education, literacy is important in it. The West was different. To the West, the serf didn't need Japji Sahib to read. He should not read. So there need not be any education there. But here, even the lowest the low will, in the South perhaps it will be, I don't know South that much, but perhaps they will think that it's important to be able to read Vishnu Sahasranamam. And this idea that the word is sacred, is the written form of the word is also sacred. So it is not enough to only chant from hearsay, but to see the word. To me, it seems that that is there. And numeracy is important for life. For all life, numeracy, human life, numeracy is important. Where the numeracy is not taught, where the people are not considered independent. So India is a society of independent, sovereign people. So there's no question that everybody will not be numerate to the extent that he can function in his occupation and his peer group effectively. So the pressure for being educated is significant because you need to know your religion and you need to know your group and you need to do the vyavhara with your group. So this is completely functional issues. It's not so not doing it would have been today I can see in my neighborhood, if I go to do some shopping, the person selling the milk, if I take 3 packets of milk, he finds it very difficult to multiply 25 by 3 or 30 by 3. He has to use a calculator, and that also he has to do 2 times. And several times he makes errors and loses some money in the process. So this is a state of decay, though we have made people. So, but this is a society for which the word is important and the number is important. And people are independent. Nobody is a serf or a slave. So it's natural that there will be universal literacy and universal numeracy.